Hi everyone, welcome back to my top 500 games, and we are continuing on right now from number 304, which is N+. This is a game that I played on the Xbox 360. I don't know if it was available on other systems, I'm really not sure, but I played it on the Xbox 360, and I was actually introduced to this game through my friend Alex, who I know from university, and well, I didn't have a Xbox 360 at the time, but I eventually did get one in 2010, and that's when I got this game. And basically, it's sort of like a 2D platformer, apart from you have loads of very small levels and very, very basic graphics. It's like the walls are grey and the background is like a lighter grey. It's like that type of graphics. But you play as this ninja character and you have to sort of jump around, and I know I'm just describing the basics of a platform game here, but it was a lot about the physics of the game. So the angle of which you jumped off the floor and the speed that you were at when you ran and jumped. There was a lot of focus on that, and so in order to fit through like specific gaps, you had to make sure that you ran at a certain speed and the floor that you jumped off was at a certain angle so that you could jump through and collect the items. You basically had to collect all of these little dots and then just make it to the end of the level. It's a very basic game in concept, but it's also interesting enough, I think, that when you do play this game, you do have to consider all of those different angles and all that sort of stuff. Number 303. Now, this is a game that I have heard people speak really negatively about because of how simple it is and how basic it is. But I have a story about this game, and I think I may have mentioned this in one of the earlier parts as well, because this game is Alleyway. Alleyway is a game on the original Game Boy, and it's a very, very basic bat and ball game. So you play as the little bat, and you've got this ball that like goes down and bounces up, and you have to break all of the bricks, like a breakout style game. Now, my story behind this game is that this was one of the first original 3 Game Boy games that I got on my 10th birthday in 1998. Because I mentioned before that I got F1 Race, which I've already talked about in the previous part. I got this a weird American football game that I didn't understand how to play, and I got Alleyway. And of the 3, Alleyway is probably the one I played the most. The way that this game is structured is that all the levels comes in sets of 3s. So you've got the first level, which is just this basic block of bricks, and the way that it works is that hitting a white brick gives you 1 point, then a slightly darker grey gives you about 2 points, and then the last darker brick gives you 3 points. And you have to clear out all the bricks. But the first level was just that single block, and then the second level was the same, apart from the whole block moved to the side. So it was like constantly scrolling and constantly repeating as this pattern was moving across the screen. And then the third level was the same again, apart from after so many times the ball hit the paddle, the whole level went down. So it kind of closed in on you. But when it got to a certain point in the level, the bricks just disappeared. So they couldn't actually fall into you, but it just dropped as you kept hitting the ball. After every 3 stages, there was the bonus stage, which is basically a pattern of a Nintendo character. So it might be Mario or it might be a Koopa. At the time, I didn't understand all these Mario references. I knew who Mario was, but I didn't understand all the references. But the way that it works is that on these bonus stages, the ball actually goes through the bricks rather than bounces off them. And you'll have like a minute or so try to break all of the bricks, and the music speeds up the further you go through. And if you do it all, you get an extra life, and then you'll go to the next set of 3 levels, which goes through the same pattern again, like a different setup. So like the stage 4 is this particular setup, and then stage 5 is the same setup, but things are scrolling across, and then the third setup, which is stage 6, will be the same but falling down again. Although the variations are that when you do have the scrolling along levels, it's not always just the whole thing scrolling to the left. Sometimes you'll have parts scrolling in different directions or parts scrolling at different speeds, and when it comes to the levels that drop, sometimes you'll have levels whereby it will drop and then more will come. It'll start repeating the pattern, or it'll repeat the pattern but things will be flipped around and stuff. And also what you have in this game is that if the ball hits the roof of the stage, the paddle will shrink to a smaller size, so you want to try to avoid that. But the first 3 levels actually have this solid wall blocking off the top of the stage, so you can't actually get that until you do get to stage 4, whereby that can happen. Now the reason that I rank this game, and I know I said right at the start when I was talking about the rules, I do rate this game higher than Hyperboloid HD, even though many could say that Hyperboloid HD has, again, I did that when I said talking about flight control. Hyperboloid HD. Anyway, yeah, that game does have more to it. It does have more types of bricks, it has more types of power-ups and stuff. But what I found with Hyperboloid HD is that it's so easy to just do a string of levels and then be done with the game. Whereas what I liked about this game, and I suppose this is more of an old school typey thing with these old games, is that when you play a game, you actually start from the beginning and you actually have to try to get to the end of the game. And if you lose and run out of lives, you have to start again. So I have many fond memories of, just keep trying and trying and trying, just trying to get that perfect run through. Whereas with a game like Hyperblight HD, you just have to do it and then that's it, if you get what I mean. I also have memories of playing this game on the balcony when we went to Ibiza in 1998, which is also, I talked about that in Kirby's Dream Land. And I did complete this game once. I remember being sat down in the living room, my uncle Darren was there, and I was playing it, and I completed the last level, and it has a picture of Mario, and he says, "Well done," and I was proud of myself. The game actually just continue on from that point. You just start the game again, but it's called level whatever the number is for the next level. But that's alleyway. Number 302 is Arkanoid Live. Now, I want to point out this is a very, very similar game to Alleyway, but it's kind of like a more advanced version. But I got this on the Xbox 360, and so everything that I've basically talked about with Alleyway, well, no, that's not true. Not everything applies here, obviously, but the basic rules apply. It's a bat and ball game. But what makes this game stand out is that you have different variations with different types of blocks. So sometimes you'll have blocks that take multiple hits. So you have to hit them and then you have to hit them again. You also have different power-ups that you can collect. Sometimes when you hit a block, a power-up will drop and you can go into it and collect it and then you will get whatever the power-up is. It might be a larger paddle or a multi-ball thing or whatever. And I actually have a memory of playing an Arkanoid game in school, but when I say that, it wasn't necessarily as part of the school, just on the computers at school. This is all the way back in primary school. Sometimes we'd have these things where in the main hall we'd have all these different, you could call them attractions I suppose, all set up around the hall and you had to go around and pay to do things. It was basically like a fundraiser for the school. So sometimes you'd have like this thing of sand with matchsticks in and you paid like 50 pence for a turn, and if you pulled out the right matchstick with the right end on, you won a prize, things like that. And there was an Arkanoid game there as well, apart from you controlled it with the mouse, and I remember, because it was a computer game, I was like, I want to play that one. So I managed to get a go, but because you were playing with the mouse, and I was so confused about playing like with a mouse on this weird game, it felt really strange. I don't think I did very well on it. Also, just a side note, and I know this has got nothing to do with Arkanoid, but I just wanted to mention it. There was one of these times where we did have one of these little fundraisers. It might have been the same one. We did have these little fundraisers in the main hall, and I actually won a prize because there was this grid of squares, and you had to guess where Santa was in the grid. So you got paid 50 pence for a turn. I paid £1, and you could write your name in a square per turn that you bought, and whoever got the closest won. And I won by writing my name in the most mathematically optimal spaces. No other kid would do that, but I did, and I won. So I got a singing Santa Claus thingy. But whatever, that's just enough of that. Number 301 is Dragon Quest Swords. This is one of the very, very few Wii games that I actually had. This is basically taking the Dragon Quest formula and mixing it in with the Wii type gameplay thing with the whole motion controls with the stick. And what I remember about it was that you just went forward, and it was kind of like an on-rails game, like an on-rails shooter, so to speak. Apart from instead of shooting, you just swung the Wiimote and you hit the enemies that way. And you also could press the B button to raise your shield, and there would be points on the screen where it would say, like, the enemy's going to attack here, so you can like raise your shield and block it, and your shield would be damaged over time the more that you blocked. And you could, in Dragon Quest fashion, get experience points and level up, and you could buy new equipment, and you could also power up your allies that you took with you, all that lovely RPG kind of stuff. I also remember seeing that one of the shields that you could get was a spoon, and I remember seeing videos on YouTube of someone just playing through and using the spoon as the shield. So the idea is that the spoon has a very, very small blocking area, so you have to be very precise with it. But I don't know if there's any long-term benefits that comes with using a spoon. It was just quite funny, I suppose. Maybe it's just a joke, I don't know. But yeah, there's that. That's one of the very, very few Wii games I've ever had. And that does it for the first 200 games on the list. We are on to number 300, and I've got to say that so far this has been great. First 200 down, got another 300 to go. We're almost halfway, almost to the 250 point. Looking forward to it. I'm just to say that yeah, I am excited to get to these higher games, and so I am just happy that we have gotten to this point. So let's not stop. Let's continue on to number 300, and that is Rayman 3 Hoodlum Havoc. I got this game quite late actually, and when I say late, what I mean is relative to how much I was playing platform games at this time, because I was well past the point where I was playing RPGs and I wasn't playing platform games as much. But I figured to myself, you know what, I haven't played Rayman 3, I'm going to get Rayman 3, and so I did. What I find with Rayman 3 is, and this applies to quite a few other platform games that kind of started on the PS1 style type era and moved on a bit. There's a couple of other games that do this, is where they try to, how do I put this? Not so much take themselves too seriously, but they sort of believe that they have to be silly, and so they really play it up. If you look at certain games, like PS1 games, platformers, you know they're silly because that's just the way that they are, but Rayman 3 is one of those games whereby it felt that it had to be silly as part of its thing. And I know some people think that it's funny because it has these jokes in it, but to me, I didn't really like that. It's a 3D platformer, it's a 3D Rayman game, and what stood out to me about this game, as opposed to the other 3D Rayman games, was that you collected points in this fashion that you got extra points for building up a combo, and you had to go around and collect these yellow gem things, and the more that you got in a row built up a combo. Also, there wasn't really like an overworld level selecting, and I always find that when games do that, it makes it rather hard to contextualize things. Like if you have a game where you got a level select and you can move between the levels and all that, then it kind of makes it easier to understand where levels are relative to each other and stuff. But when it's just you complete level, then you go through a doorway, and then the screen will say the name of the next area, I find it a lot harder to remember the different places, and I really find it difficult to remember the specific levels, and that is the case with this game. But it does have the basic Rayman things. You've got your enemies, you've got your punching ability, you've got your helicopter ability. You also can get different power-ups which will allow you to do the different things like grabbing onto the purple lumps, which was strange how it was like a temporary power-up in this game as opposed to like a permanent one. But there were also silly like mini-games and all that along the way, like where you would be in this tube thing, I don't know how to describe it, and you have to like jump along these platforms as you're constantly rushing forward. And you did have to save tinsies to get like extra power and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, it was a fun game. I just find that it wasn't very memorable as a whole. But I do remember one part that does stick out to me was the area where there were invisible platforms, but their reflections were visible. So you had these invisible platforms, but you could only tell where they were by their reflection. It was strange, but I liked it. Number 299 is Asterix for the PlayStation. I believe this is one of those games that wasn't released outside of Europe, or maybe just wasn't released in America or something, I don't know. I'm not too sure about that, but this game is basically Risk. That is what it is. I didn't really understand that at the time because I didn't know what Risk was. But the way that it works is that you have France and you have to basically take over France, or at least liberate France, or something to do with France. And you have the three characters. There's one character that I don't know the name of, who's kind of like this professor type guy, and you use him to pour liquid into these cauldrons on each of these different tiles. And then, again, I may be mixing this up, it's been ages since I played this, but you use either Asterix or Obelisk to then move pieces around between the grids. So you might have 10 units on this space and 4 units on that other space next to it. You can move some around. And then you use the other character, who I think was Obelisk, to then take those, and you could attack the different squares, and the more soldiers that you took, the more likely you were to win. It was basically Risk, but what made it different from Risk, really, was that there are certain tiles on the map where if you try to take over them, you would have to complete this platform level. It was just like a platform game. But it was strange because you would think it would just be a platform game, but no. It was this strategy game where you took over the individual spaces. And I did complete this game, and I did quite enjoy this game. One thing I remember always doing was making sure that all of my units were on the outside, as far out as they could be, so there was no point of having any on the inside. Like, if you've got one space that's completely surrounded by other ones, you may as well just put your extra units in the areas around it that are touching the enemies' areas. Number 298 is Need for Speed Pro Street. I don't really have too much to say about this game, but I got this on the PS2, and I got this game at quite a late date. I got it when I was well into my RPG phase, and I was really into, RPGs at that time. But I thought to myself, I haven't played a racing game for a while, I just felt like getting a racing game. And I was with my dad one day, because it was a Sunday, and we were always seeing our dad on Sundays, and then we went to HMV, and I bought this game, Need for Speed Pro Street. And then we went to my nana's house, and there was at the time a PS2 at my nana's house, and the reason for that, and that sounds a bit strange, but the reason for that is because we went there every so often. We went there quite a lot, and so my dad had recently inherited a PS2 from his wife's oldest son, but it's getting a bit complicated. But yeah, basically there was a PS2 at my nana's house, and that's where I first played it, and I was just thinking, it's nice to play a racing game again. I mostly remember getting to a point where I couldn't really progress because it got too hard. I think you had to repeat races so you could get money or something to grind for points or whatever, so you could upgrade. But it did get to a point where I felt it got too hard. Number 297 is Need for Speed Carbon on the City. Now this is the PSP version of Need for Speed Carbon, and again, I know it's another Need for Speed game on this list right after the previous one, but this game in particular, I like the open world nighttime theme to it. There were different things to do. I remember you had the story, which was like all these dark comic strip things, and I quite like that. And I also remember in this world you had to find the different crates to burst open. So it was like a collectible thing. And I think this was probably my first experience of a racing game where you did that, where you actually went around and found collectibles or things to break. And I remember scouring the city for these different crates to break, and I remember finding so many and then just not being able to find them. But sometimes you'd find that extra one somewhere, and yeah. But also, when it comes to racing games, for some reason I like cities at nighttime. Generally I don't like games where it's too dark so that you can't see. So racing games where it goes from night to dark, I generally just prefer it being night to dark. Did I just say night to dark? I meant light to dark. So light to dark, and generally I just prefer it being light because it's easy to see. But if it's centered around it being dark and, you can see clearly, I really like that. But yeah, I'm just going to end this here. So thank you for listening. I will see you all next time. Goodbye.